The wind arrived without warning, sharp as a honed blade cutting across the high basin of Barrow's crossing. One moment, the sage flats lay open and gray. The next, the world snapped shut into white. Parker Calder was half a mile from his line of rabbit snares when the squall hit. Snow drove sideways. The air turned to needles. Juniper, his old mare, tossed her head and tried to bolt, hooves skittering on crusted drifts. Parker did not waste breath on panic. He took the reins close, pressed his shoulder to the mare's neck, and pulled her into the lee of a boulder. The gusts found every seam in his coat. His eyelashes crusted, the horizon vanished. Somewhere behind him, the trail disappeared, swallowed whole, leaving no second chances. He knew this country's rules. In a full whiteout, a man could walk in a circle until his legs quit. He could fall 10 yards from shelter and never find it. And tonight, the cold was dropping fast. Parker turned Juniper toward the talus slope where limestone ribs broke through the snow like old bones. He moved by touch and memory, 3 paces, then 10 counting rocks, feeling for the rise that led to a narrow notch in the cliff. The wind howled louder, like something alive and hungry. Juniper's breath came in harsh clouds. Parker's fingers went numb around the leather. Then his boots struck stone that was not buried. A darker gap opened in the whiteness. Parker shoved through it, dragging the mare after him. The change was instant. Outside, the blizzard screamed. Inside, the roar fell away, muffled by ancient rock. The knife wind could not reach. The air held steady, cool but merciful, as if the cave had been saving its warmth for centuries. Parker led Juniper deeper, where lantern light kissed rough walls and revealed the unthinkable. A small cabin, built clean and square beneath the stone ceiling. Real timber. A proper door. A window set to catch what little daylight the mouth of the cave could give. He latched the cabin, checked the stove, and ran a hand along stacked firewood, dry as August. Water waited in a covered basin. Hay hung in the net for Juniper. Parker listened to the storm hammering the entrance like fists on a coffin lid. 5 days, he judged, reading the wind the way other men read newspapers. Back in Barrow's crossing, they were still laughing at the man who lived in a cave. They would not be laughing for long, while the storm sealed the basin in ice. The story itself reached backward to its true beginning late summer of the year before, when the ground was still bare and unforgiving. The parcel sat at the edge of Barrow's crossing like a mistake no one bothered to correct. 34 acres of limestone ribs and loose talus, no grass worth cutting, no soil deep enough for roots to hold. A place where wagons broke axles and fences leaned until they gave up. That was why the price stayed low and why Parker Calder bought it. He stood alone on the slope the day the papers were signed, boots grinding against pale stone. The cliff face rose above him, weathered smooth in places, fractured in others. Near its base yawned a dark opening, wide enough to swallow a man and keep his secrets. Marshal Harlan Pike rode up slow, studying the land the way a judge studies a defendant. "Strange choice," Pike said at last. "Most folks won't touch rock like this. It can be a tomb for the careless." Parker did not argue. He rested a hand against the stone, feeling the cool bleed into his palm. "It's only a tomb if you don't know how to read it," Pike squinted. "And you do?" "Spent 10 years pulling silver from mountains meaner than this one," Parker said, his voice flat. "You learn fast what holds and what buries you." The marshal's skepticism remained, though now edged with curiosity. "What are you planning to build here?" Pike asked. Parker's answer came without ornament. A home. The marshal turned in his saddle, scanning the broken slope, the scattered boulders, the cliff with no flat yard beneath it. "I don't see where," he said. Parker lifted his chin and pointed, not to the open land, but to the shadow cut into the rock. In there. Pike followed the gesture, then let out a breath that was half laugh, half disbelief. Word traveled faster than any horse in Barrow's crossing. By nightfall, the story had already changed shape. The man who bought useless land, the man who planned to live in a hole. What no one bothered to say was the simple truth beneath it all. The land had rejected every ordinary use. Parker Calder had merely stopped asking it to be something it was not. By sundown, the story had reached the saloon, which was where Barrow's crossing decided what things meant. The place smelled of spilled whiskey and wet wool. Boots lined the rail. Cards slapped the tables. When Parker Calder's name came up, it did not come gently. Councilman Everett Rusk leaned back on his stool, grin wide enough to invite agreement. Most men build houses, he said, letting the pause do its work. That one's building a cave. Laughter rolled through the room, quick and eager. It was easier to laugh than to ask questions. Martha Klein set down a glass with a sharp click. Caves are dark, she said. They're damp. They breed sickness. You can't raise a decent life in a hole in the ground. Heads nodded. Someone muttered about mold. Someone else mentioned bats. As if the word itself settled the matter. The talk picked up speed. Jokes sharpened. Each retelling made the idea smaller and the man inside it stranger. Parker became a character instead of a neighbor, a curiosity, a warning. He'll crawl back by winter, a ranch hand said. Won't last a week, another added. Let him learn, Russ concluded, lifting his glass. Some lessons only come one way. Parker was not there to answer. He did not defend himself. That absence worked against him. Without the man present, the crowd filled the space with its own certainty. Mockery has a purpose in places like this. It draws a hard line between what is acceptable and what is not. It keeps the world familiar by punishing anything that strays too far from the center. By the end of the night, the verdict had settled in. Parker Calder was not just wrong, he was foolish. Maybe dangerous to himself, certainly not worth worrying about. The laughter followed him out into the street, drifting on the lampid air. It would follow him for months, and it would be remembered word for word. When the laughter stopped. The laughter did not end the matter. In a town like Barrow's Crossing, ridicule was loud, but decisions were made in daylight. A week later, the meeting hall filled with benches and bodies, the rough pine walls creaking as men shifted their weight. Parker Calder stood alone at the front, hat in his hands. He did not smile. He did not apologize for the idea that had already been tried and convicted without him. He spoke plainly. A cave holds steady, he said, about 52 degrees summer or winter. Stone doesn't care about wind. Snow can pile up all at once. It can't push its way inside. Martha Klein rose first. As expected, caves are wet, she said. They're dark. They make people sick, and everyone knows what lives in them. Parker nodded once. Only if you pick the wrong one, he replied. This one's dry. It breathes on its own. Air moves in and out through natural channels. As for bats, they eat what bites. I'd rather have fewer insects than fewer lungs. He paused. There will be windows, oil lamps, light where it's needed. A ripple of murmurs moved through the benches. Gideon Reel, arms crossed thick with years of carpentry, leaned forward. Rock falls, he said. I've seen ceilings come down. What keeps it from burying you? Parker turned to a chalkboard and drew a simple arch. This ceiling's been standing longer than any house in this room, he said. I won't touch the load-bearing stone. No blasting, no cutting pillars. I build beneath it, not against it. A man in the back raised his voice. What about floods? Parker unrolled a sheet of paper and pinned it flat. Lines marked slope and elevation. The cave mouth sits 38 feet above the wash, he said. Water runs away from it, not toward it. There's a natural channel here, and I'll add another. He tapped the page. I measured. Councilman Rusk let out a quiet chuckle, the sound of someone amused but unconvinced. A few followed him. Habit was hard to break. Parker did not raise his voice to chase them. He finished with what mattered. I'm not guessing, he said. I'm not hoping. I'm working with what's already here. The room went, still not convinced, but unsettled. For the first time, the idea had weight. It rested on numbers in stone instead of rumors. Somewhere between assumption and measurement. Doubt began to lose its grip. The meeting ended without a vote. That was fine. Parker Calder did not need permission from a room full of benches. He began the work the next morning. Inside the cave, sound behaved differently. Each step echoed once and then disappeared, swallowed by the dark. Parker set his lantern down and started with what the cave gave him. Loose stone first. He rolled fist-sized rocks away from the walls, then larger ones, testing each before committing his weight. Anything that moved under pressure came out. He swept the floor clean with a bundled branch, raising pale dust that settled slowly like time itself. Chalk marks appeared on the stone lines that meant nothing to passers-by, but everything to a man planning to stay alive. Paths, clearances, places where the ceiling dipped low enough to collect moisture. He took a small hammer and tapped the roof, listening. Solid stone rang dull and deep. Hollow spots answered sharp. Parker marked the difference and adjusted his plan, shifting the cabin footprint away from the drip line where water had traced its slow patience for generations. Outside, voices carried in from the slope. Still digging his grave, someone said. Another laughed. Caveman. They did not step inside. They did not offer help or questions. They kept their distance as if foolishness were catching. Parker never looked up. He did not argue with the words or the men who threw them. Stone did not respond to opinion, and neither did he. He worked until his hands ached and the lantern burned low, then worked a little more. By afternoon, the floor lay level. The chosen corner sat dry and calm, the air steady. The ceiling above it held firm, untouched by fracture or seam. Nothing dramatic announced itself. No speech changed minds, no crowd gathered, but something important had happened all the same. A place, once dismissed as useless, had begun to take shape under deliberate hands. The cave did not fight him. It did not collapse or protest. It accepted the work in silence. And in that silence, respect unseen and unclaimed started to grow. The work moved outward from the cave and back again. Following the slow rhythm Parker trusted, he cut lodgepole pine from the upper draw where the trunks grew straight and tight-grained. Each tree fell clean. Each log was limbed, dragged, and stacked by hand. There was no hurry in the process, only intention. Wood that would hold a life together deserved patience. Inside the cave, Parker laid out the footprint. 14 feet by 18 small, by town standards enough by his own. He set the frame several feet away from the stone walls, leaving a narrow gap all around it. Not wasted space, a buffer. Air could move there. Moisture could die before it reached the boards. He split slate from the slope and carried it in piece by piece, setting the cabin floor above the cave's skin. Stone on stone, lifted just enough to keep damp from climbing into the grain. When the first joist settled level, Parker paused, sighted it, then nodded once. The frame went up square and true, each joint fit clean. No forcing, no shortcuts. Timber took its place inside the larger geometry of rock, as if the cave had been waiting for it. A window came next, set to face the mouth of the cave. It was not large, but it was honest. It caught the pale daylight and threw it across the interior, breaking the dark into something useful. Parker built a small porch beneath it, barely wide enough for a man to stand and knock snow from his boots before stepping inside. From the outside, passers-by saw little. A man hauling wood, a glow from the cave at dusk. Rumors kept pace with the hammering, but they thinned as the shape became undeniable. Inside, the logic was clear. The stone took the wind. The wood held the warmth. Between them lay a space that worked. Parker stepped back at the end of each day and checked his work the way a craftsman always does, not for praise, but for failure. He ran his hand along the wall where wood and air met stone, dry. Still, the cave did not crush the cabin. It sheltered it. What had once sounded absurd now stood upright, measured, and solid. The idea had weight. It cast shadows. It could be touched, and in the quiet pride of a job taking form, the laughter from town began to sound thin and far away. With the frame standing, Parker turned to the problems that killed men quietly. Fire came first. He noticed the fissure while checking the ceiling, a narrow crack running straight up through the limestone. He knew a raw fissure was a death trap, prone to blockages and leaking deadly fumes. A chimney needed to be built, not just found. For weeks he worked, carefully lining the lower part of the fissure with flat stones and a mortar of clay. He mixed himself, building a proper sealed flue inside the rock. When it was set, he lit a twist of straw and watched the smoke. At first, it wavered. He found and sealed the tiny seam he'd missed. On the second try, the smoke curled, hesitated, then lifted, drawn upward, and gone, with a steady, relentless pull. He shut the stove down and repeated the test the next day and the day after that. Different weather, different air. Only when the draft pulled clean every time did he call it finished. Water came next. A thin seep traced one wall of the cave, slow but constant. Parker stacked stone into a shallow basin, guiding the trickle where he wanted it. He layered sand and charcoal. He burned himself, letting the water pass through and settle clear. It was not fast, but it was steady. But Parker never trusted a filter alone. Every drop intended for him was boiled first. A life-or-death rule he never broke. Water for Juniper was enough with the filter, but for himself he took no chances. He dug a shallow trench along the low side of the cave floor, giving stray moisture a path to leave. It followed gravity without argument, disappearing into the rock's own channels. Storage followed. Shelves went into natural pockets in the stone, tucked where the air stayed cool. Deeper back, Parker carved out a narrow root nook where temperatures held even when the surface swung wild. Grain, salt, tools. Each thing had a place, and each place had a reason. Nothing about the work was dramatic. There were no crowds, no speeches, just repetition. Test, adjust, test again. When something failed, Parker did not curse it. He corrected it. On a cold evening, he lit the stove and watched the smoke vanish upward, clean and sure. The basin filled drop by drop. The floor stayed dry. The systems worked not because they were clever, but because they were honest. This was the part no joke could touch, no rumor could undo. A shelter did not need approval, it needed proof, and here, inside the stone, proof accumulated quietly. One solved problem at a time until doubt no longer had anywhere to stand. With the hard problem settled, Parker turned to the one that mattered most, Juniper. He built her pen along the warmer side of the cave, where the air stayed calm and the floor rose just enough to keep it dry. Rough boards formed a low enclosure, strong but open. He spread clean straw thick under her hooves and hung a hay net at chest height where she could eat without wasting half of it on the ground. There was no wind here, no drifting snow, no scent of predators riding the night air. Juniper stepped in and stood still, ears forward, reading the place, the way animals always do. She did not paw or circle. She lowered her head and pulled at the hay. Slow and certain, Parker watched without moving. A man could lie to himself about comfort. An animal could not. He checked the water bucket, then reached up and rested his hand against the mare's neck. Her skin was warm, her breathing even. She leaned into the touch, not seeking reassurance, but offering it. Outside the cave, winter was gathering its strength. Coyotes would roam closer. Storms would press harder. A horse left to face that alone would burn itself thin just to stay alive. Here, the stone took that burden. The shelter was no longer an idea or a theory. It was a place where a living thing chose to stand without fear. That choice carried more weight than any argument spoken in town. Parker stepped back and let Juniper settle. He did not speak to her. He did not need to. Trust did not announce itself. It showed up quietly in the way a horse relaxed her legs and fed in peace while the world outside sharpened its teeth. And in that quiet, the stakes of the coming winter became clear. This shelter had to work because now it was holding more than one life. Parker moved into the cave before the first hard frost settled the basin. There was no ceremony to it. He carried his bed in pieces, set it against the cabin wall, stacked his tools, and lit the stove for the night. The fire took easily. The smoke drew clean. Outside, the temperature slid downward, but inside, the stone held steady, unmoved by the change. In Barrow's crossing, the waiting began. Men at the saloon set timelines with the confidence of people who had never tested their own assumptions. One winter, they said, maybe less. The cave would turn damp. The cold would seep in. The man would come back in hand, ready to admit his mistake. Weeks passed. Parker's routine settled. He split less wood than any household in town because the stove did not have to fight the wind. Snow piled at the cave mouth, but it never touched the cabin roof. His boots dried overnight. His clothes stayed warm to the touch. Martha Clean watched smoke rise from the hillside in the mornings and frowned. Councilman Rusk made jokes that landed with less force each time he told them. The cave did not swallow Parker. It did not sicken him or drive him out. It did something far more troubling to the skeptics. It worked. By mid-inter, Parker moved through his days without hurry. He read by lamplight. He mended harness. Juniper gained weight instead of losing it. While roofs in town groaned under snow and men rose in the night to stoke fires against the wind, Parker slept through until morning. No victory was claimed. No words were offered in reply to the months of doubt. The satisfaction came without smugness, the way true competence always does. A system proven in ordinary weather rarely announced itself. It simply removed problems before they could be felt. The town noticed, even as it pretended not to. And beneath that pretense lay a deeper fear, unspoken but growing. If the cave could do this in a normal winter, what would happen when the season stopped being kind? The warning did not come with thunder. It came quietly, the way real danger often does. Parker noticed the barometer first. The needle slid lower than it should have, then kept going. Outside the cave, the wind shifted direction, no longer wandering but settling into a steady pull from the north. By afternoon, the birds were gone. Not scattered, gone. Juniper felt it before the sky showed anything. She stamped once, then twice, lifting her head to the cave mouth and listening. Animals did not know forecasts, but they understood pressure. Parker took the signs as they came without drama. He checked the wood pile and brought more inside, stacking it where it would stay dry no matter what followed. He counted sacks of grain and jars of preserved meat. He topped off the water basin and refreshed the charcoal in the filter. Salt went within easy reach. Extra hay followed, packed tight where Juniper could reach it without strain. There was no panic in the work, only thoroughness. The barometer dropped again. The air outside grew sharp, carrying a metallic edge that stung the lungs. Clouds pressed low against the Regilene, flattening the world into dull gray. Parker stood at the cave entrance for a long moment, reading the land the way he always had. He could not say how hard the blow would be, only that it would not be small. Nature did not bargain. It did not care about plans made in town halls or bets made over drinks. It arrived on its own terms and stayed until it was finished. Parker latched the outer door and stepped back inside, sealing the stone between himself and the open slope. Juniper settled behind him, ears flicking once, then still. The barometer needle crept lower still. Somewhere beyond the limestone walls, Barrow's crossing carried on as usual, unaware that its assumptions were about to be tested all at once. Inside the cave, a man and a horse waited not with fear, but with preparation. And in that preparation, dread took shape, slow and unavoidable, like the pressure building before a storm that had already made up its mind. The storm arrived in the night and erased the basin before morning. The temperature plunged to 35 below zero, the kind of cold that did not bite so much as crush. Wind followed close behind it, steady and merciless, screaming across the flats at 60, sometimes 70 meters an hour. Snow did not fall, it attacked. Visibility vanished. The world shrank to arm's length and stayed there. Barrow's crossing disappeared under the first surge. Roads filled and vanished. Drifts rose shoulder-high against doors and windows, hardening into walls of ice. Men shoveled until their breath failed, then shoveled again, afraid to stop. By midday, panic found its footing. The post office roof sagged under the weight and gave way with a crack that echoed through the whiteout. Snow poured in, burying mail and memories alike. Doors froze shut. Hinges screamed and snapped when forced. At Martha Klein's house, the stove fought the wind and lost. Snow packed the chimney, sealing it tight. Smoke backed up into the room, thick and choking. She opened windows into the storm, coughing, trading one danger for another. The fire died. The cold moved in. Across town, Councilman Rusk heard a sound like tearing cloth. The north wall of his house shuddered, then peeled away under the pressure. Boards ripped loose as if by invisible hands. He dragged furniture against the gap, stuffing coats and blankets into the seams while the wind found every weakness and widened it. Marshal Pike worked through the first night, going door to door where he could, but paths closed behind him as fast as he cut them. An older couple, 2 houses down, never answered. By the time anyone reached them again, the cold had already made its decision. Water lines froze. Pumps failed. Firewood disappeared faster than it could be burned. Men who had laughed weeks before now broke furniture for fuel, splintering tables to keep one room barely livable. The storm did not ease. It settled in. 5 days inside the cave. Parker Calder heard it all without feeling it. The wind struck the limestone walls like a living thing, roaring and clawing, but it could not pass. Sound carried low and distant as if the storm were shouting from another world. Inside, the air stayed calm. The temperature held steady, unmoved by the violence outside. Parker fed the stove when it needed it. No more. The draft pulled clean, smoke vanishing up the fissure as it always had. He checked the seams with a bare hand. Dry. Warm. The stone gave nothing to the cold. Juniper stood in her pen and ate, untroubled. Her breath fogged lightly, then faded. She slept sanding, one hind leg cocked, trusting the shelter without question. Day blended into night and back again, measured only by the steady tasks of survival. Water continued to fill the basin, drop by patient drop. The floor stayed dry. The shelves held firm. Nothing failed. Outside, the town came apart in pieces. Men ran out of wood and huddled in kitchens, breathing shallow to conserve warmth. Families crowded into single rooms, layering coats and blankets until movement became impossible. Panic bred arguments. Arguments burned energy. Energy burned heat. The storm pressed harder, testing every corner, every joint, every bad decision made in better weather. Roofs groaned, nails worked loose. Wind forced its way through cracks no one had bothered to seal. Inside the cave, the stone answered every challenge with indifference. Parker sat at the table and listened. He could hear the storm rise and fall like surf. He could feel its presence without its touch. The difference mattered. On the third day, he stood at the cave mouth and looked out, sheltered by rock. Snow screamed past the opening, fast enough to blur into streaks. He watched without danger as a man might watch fire from behind glass. It was like looking at hell from a place that refused to burn. By the fourth night, the town had gone quiet, not because things were better, but because there was nothing left to say. Fear spent itself and left exhaustion behind. On the fifth day, the wind finally broke. Snow fell straight down for the first time all week, then thinned. The pressure lifted. The storm, having taken what it could, moved on. Silence followed, heavy and unfamiliar. Inside the cave, nothing changed. The stove ticked as it cooled. Juniper shifted her weight and shook straw from her mane. Parker rose, stretched, and waited a while longer. He had learned not to trust sudden calm. When he finally stepped outside, the basin lay buried and broken. Barrow's crossing was a scatter of shapes under snow, altered and diminished. The verdict had been delivered. The storm had searched for weakness and found plenty. The cave had offered none. The storm ended the way it had begun, without ceremony. On the sixth morning, Parker Calder opened the outer door and felt air that no longer tried to kill him. The wind had gone slack. Snow fell straight down, light and tired, as if it had spent everything it had. He stepped out onto the slope and looked across the basin. Barrow's crossing lay buried beneath a white stillness that felt wrong. Drifts swallowed fences. Roof lines sagged where they still existed. Smoke did not rise. Nothing moved. It looked like a graveyard built overnight. Parker saddled Juniper and rode down into the valley at a measured pace. The sound of her hooves was the only thing that broke the silence. Every few yards he passed signs of the storm's work. Splintered boards, half-collapsed sheds, doors frozen in place like sealed tombs. People emerged slowly as if unsure the world was safe again. Faces appeared at windows. A man stepped into the street and stopped short when he saw Parker riding toward him, clean and upright, his coat dry. Marshal Harland Pike stood near the center of town, shoulders hunched, eyes rimmed red from cold and sleepless nights. When he saw Parker, he did not speak at first. He simply stared, as though looking at something that should not exist. "You lived," Pike said at last. Parker reined in beside him. He did not smile. He did not explain. He did not look around for witnesses. "The cave," he said. The words landed heavy. Final Pike nodded once, slowly around them. The town began to take notice. Whispers spread. People leaned closer, drawn by the simple fact that one man had walked out of what the rest of them had barely survived. No cheering followed. No celebration fit the moment. There were bodies to count, homes to assess, losses that would not be undone. But something fundamental had shifted. The laughter that once followed Parker Calder through these streets had no place here now. In its absence stood a harder truth, carved clean by wind and cold. The storm had taken almost everything it could. It had not taken him. And as Parker sat his horse in the quiet aftermath, the unspoken question settled over Barrow's crossing like the last falling snow. If the cave had saved one life so completely, what might it do for the rest? Councilman Everett Rusk did not come with a crowd. He came alone, boots crunching over packed snow, shoulders drawn in as if the cold were still gripping him. His face had lost its color. His hands shook, not from weather but from the effort of standing upright after everything he had seen. Parker Calder met him at the edge of the slope where the cave mouth cut its dark line into the limestone. Rusk cleared his throat. The words did not come easily. "We've got people who can't last another night like this," he said. "Old folks, a few families. The worst hit houses won't hold." Parker listened without interrupting. He did not remind the councilman of laughter or names. The storm had already done that work. "How many?" Parker asked. Rusk hesitated, then answered honestly, "As many as you can take." Parker considered the space he knew better than anyone, the airflow, the floor, the stored supplies, the limits that could not be argued with. 18, he said. Maybe 22, if they're willing to live close and follow rules. Rusk nodded quickly. "They'll do whatever you say." Parker's voice stayed even. "Then they'll have to admit something first." Rusk looked up, confusion flashing across his face. "You don't come in here because it's strange," Parker said. "You come in because it works. And if you want it to keep working, you leave your pride outside." The councilman swallowed. For a moment, the old version of him, the one who smiled in the saloon, flickered and vanished. "People will trust anything that keeps them alive," Rusk said, quietly. That was enough. Marshal Pike helped organize the move. Supplies arrived first. Blankets, food, lanterns, tools stacked carefully, counted and checked. Then the people followed, slow and tired, stepping into the cave with a weary respect usually reserved for churches and graves. Inside, the air held steady. The cold stayed outside. No one joked. No one questioned the rules. They took the spaces Parker assigned and made themselves small, grateful for the chance to be anywhere else. Word spread through Barrow's crossing fast and clean. The cave was no longer a punchline. The man inside it was no longer a fool. What had been mocked as madness became the town's lifeline in less than a day. Parker did not stand above them. He moved through the shelter, checking water, tending the stove, making sure Juniper had room. His authority came not from position, but from proof. Trust once denied arrived fully formed. It did not need speeches. It did not need forgiveness. It needed warmth, dry air, and stone that refused to bend. Outside the town lay broken and humbled. Inside the cave, people breathed easier than they had in days. Vindication did not come with applause. It came in the quiet sound of 20 people breathing easier than they had in days, their exhausted sighs mingling in the steady, warm air that more than any cheer was the proof. In the weeks that followed, Barrow's crossing spoke more softly. One afternoon, Gideon Reel walked up the slope alone, his hands thick with old calluses, rested at his sides without tools for the first time in years. "I built good houses," he said when Parker met him at the cave mouth. There was no challenge in his voice now, only clarity. Better than most, and the wind still tore them open. Parker did not correct him. He waited. Gideon nodded toward the limestone wall. "I thought strength was in the boards, the nails, the joinery," Parker answered, with the patience of a man who had already proved his point. "You drive nails well," he said, "but you drove them where the wind was allowed to pull them out." He rested his palm against the stone. Location is the first material. Everything else comes after the lesson spread faster than the storm ever had. New sheds went up, tucked into slopes instead of standing alone. Berm walls rose against the prevailing wind. Windbreaks of earth and timber appeared where open yards had once been left bare. The town did not copy the cave. It learned from it. Years passed. A journalist came once, notebook in hand, asking about isolation. Parker answered without bitterness. He was not cut off. He said he was protected. The difference mattered. When Parker Calder died, it was quietly in old age, with the stone still holding steady above him. By then, the cave was no longer his alone. It had become a standing rule, written without ink. In hard weather, it was open. Juniper was buried near the entrance, where the light reached the ground at certain hours. A single horseshoe hung on the wall above, darkened with age. The cave remains. Stone still outlasts wood. Shelter still favors those who listen. And the story is told the same way every time, not as a joke, but as a reminder. They mocked his cabin in a cave. Then the blizzard came. And when it was over, in the heavy silence that settled across the valley, the memory of laughter seemed like a strange echo from a world that no longer existed.